All right, and we are here with the director of Another Round, Thomas Vinterberg, and the star of the film, Mads Mikkelsen. Welcome, Thomas. Welcome, Mads. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Cameron. Thank you very much.
Loved the film. It's fun to watch, and then it gets very dark at a certain point, but that's kind of what I like about your films, Thomas. You've made a lot of my favorite films, The Celebration, Dear Wendy, The Commune, The Hunt. And one thing I love is that there's often a very simple, single what if at the center of it. In this case, what if men stayed permanently drunk? Can you talk about where that idea came from and why it was intriguing for you to turn it into a film?
Well, to start with, I just had to look at my own country. We drink a lot in Denmark, but still we talk a lot about health and about a reasonable, well-behaved life. So there's sort of a gap between our behavior and our wishful thinking of our behavior. But then I came across this theory from a Scandinavian philosopher, thinker, who said that human being was born with a lack of a little bit of alcohol in the blood.
So this theory is real. This is a genuine philosopher.
It is actually. It's a theory that comes from a man who actually claims this and protects this idea that if you've been drinking a little bit, your mind opens up. You don't look back. You become more receptive to other people. You become more creative. And he points at big, well, we all point at big elements in world history. We've been discussing if Churchill was a little bit drunk when he decided to send 250,000 civilians into war. You know that he was a little bit drunk every day, so there's a good chance that he was drunk at that moment as well.
I heard he drank a bottle of dinner every day.
What if he was not drunk? Would he have done the same thing, which was a crazy thing to do, which changed world history? And again, what if Adolf Hitler had been a little bit pissed? Would he have won?
Right. Okay, so interesting idea. And you mentioned about Denmark in particular, because obviously, most cultures have alcohol as a part of it. Alcohol affects human beings the same way all over the world. But is there something specifically Danish about the drinking culture there that was interesting for you?
Do you want to answer that, Mads?
Well, it's your film, but I think I can answer it. Yeah, I can make a comparison. If you work in France and you have lunch, you have a 3-set meal, and then you have a really nice bottle of red wine on the table, and everybody drinks a glass of wine, and everybody's happy and go back to work. If there were bottles of wine in Denmark, people would stay until all the alcohol was gone. There's a very different approach. And we compared stories the other day from our childhood when we were young, how we were introduced to alcohol. And it's quite brutal for American or Canadian. I think it would be brutal stories, the way we embrace alcohol in a very different manner.
Mm-hmm.
I had a guest in my country. She's called Jane Anderson. She's a wonderful writer. She wrote The Wife, and she stayed with me for a couple of weeks in Copenhagen. And one day she asked my daughter, "So, Nana, what are you going to do today?" And my daughter, who at this point in time was, 65 kilos, including her school bag, she said, "Well, I'm going to do the lake run today." And Jane said, "Well, so what's the lake run?" "Oh, we have to run around the lake and empty a box of beer on time."
Yes.
And Jane looks at me and she's like, "When is this guy going to interfere?"
Right.
And I was just laughing a little bit. And she said, "Aren't you going to get sick, Nana?" And Nana said, "Yes, but if we vomit in sync, time will be deducted." And Jane was very, very frightened.
It sounds insane.
And then she said, what about the police? She said, since I didn't do anything. And then Nana said, "Oh, but the teachers are there." And so, and then, you know, and suddenly I was realizing there's something in this country which is rather unique. And but then again, usage of alcohol is
It's universal, but
it's socially accepted everywhere.
yeah, but it's in different ways. Obviously, culturally, it's in different ways. You go to Japan, it's a different story. There's a hierarchy as well, where if you go to a business meeting, you have to drink as much as your boss. And if your boss happens to be a guy or a girl who's a very good drinker, you're in trouble, right? So there are different cultures when it comes to alcohol, and ours is unique in its own way.
But Cameron, this film is not only about alcohol. This film is about being alive. This is about being awakened when you're sort of dwelling through your midlife crisis or in your everyday gray routine. It's about being reawakened. Hopefully, at least that's what we tried. We tried to, of course, we have this intriguing thought about celebrating alcohol in some sense, but there's a deeper level where we try to investigate being brought back to life.
Alcohol is just the catalyst. Mads, I want to ask you about the transformation your character goes through, because at the beginning of the film, as you're saying, Thomas, your character's a bit deadened, just kind of going through the motions of his teaching career and his life at home. Alcohol sparks something in him. He's suddenly joyous in a different way, but then he goes too far with it. Can you talk about just that journey, what you need to do as an actor? Because I imagine you're also shooting out of sequence to kind of hit the moment of each scene in the trajectory of the entire film, because it's a big arc you have.
Yeah, I mean, if it was just a gradual development of a little more, and then this happens, and unavoidably we would end in a big crash. It would have been predictable for us and maybe easier to handle. But in Thomas as well, it goes a little back, a little forth, and then something happens, and then a crash happens. And so we were very much trying to be on the same page all the time, because it wasn't just a normal development. So yeah, in terms of how drunk they are when they teach, we did some small experiments before we started shooting.
Listen to that sentence.
I am very curious to know about those small experiments.
You know, they keep talking about 0.5, right? And then what happens if it's 1.0 or 1.5 or 2? So we looked into that, and we had a fairly good idea what happens with your speech and what happens to your movements, and then between me and Thomas and the rest of the cast, we have enough experience to go for it. So that's how we approached it, obviously. But as Thomas said, it started out with the idea with the alcohol, but it was very clear from the beginning that this film was just an excuse to make a film which is a big tribute to life. So a tribute to alcohol in one degree, and a much bigger one to life.
I am curious about modulating the drunkenness of your character through the film, though, because there's a whole history in movies of actors playing drunk, some well, some very badly. When an actor doesn't do it right and it's clearly doesn't feel real, what do you think actors are doing wrong, and what do you need to do to play that state of inebriation?
It's a very tricky question, because a classical way to answer that would be for any actor to say, if you're drunk, try to avoid being drunk. You know, right. That's what you most of the time you would go for that approach and say, okay, this guy is drunk and he's doing his very best not to appear drunk.
Right. And
that would be a little slow, a little controlled, a little clumsy, but not too much, right? And you can do that to a certain degree, but if you're really, really hammered,
you're above 1.2,
then it's something else. And this is where it becomes, quote unquote, overacting. But if you look at people in real life, it's insane how they behave when they're that drunk. So we spent a few days doing like crazy falls and crazy ways of moving and looking at each other and either laughing because it was really bad or laughing because it was spot on. And so we actually did a lot of rehearsals for that.
We did alcohol rehearsals where we simply said, so 0.5, how does that look? This situation, 0.7, how does that look? And, and I have to say, it's a great accomplishment from all four of them to be having an emotional life, carry a huge emotional curve, and then yet at the same time having to deal with all these levels of alcohol. It took a very good actor.
Yeah. It was obviously very tempting to say, forget about it, let's just get drunk. And then we'll just remember the lines and it will be exactly 0.7. Problem is, you can't do that for 12 hours. You can't go 0.7 for 12 hours, right?
We never tried.
Yes, you don't know till you try. Mads, in people who watch your Hollywood work in TV and film will often have seen you play some pretty scary characters, whether it's Hannibal or Le Chiffre or others. But your work in Denmark and in Europe generally can often be very different. When you're acting, how conscious are you of your public persona now, and how much can you just kind of let that go and just play the role?
While I'm acting, while I'm doing the job?
When you're preparing for the job, yeah.
Well, I would like to say that I don't think about it at all. And I do believe that's true, actually. I think that bringing any backpack or any history when you enter the holy room of directors slash actors, starting from scratch, and we're no one, and we're somebody else. So I would like to believe that's the case, and I actually do believe it. Yeah.
Okay. I want to ask you a little bit about bringing this film out into the world in the middle of a pandemic. Your film was named as one of the Cannes 2020 titles. It's playing at our festival. It will play at the San Sebastian Film Festival as well. What is that like for you? You spent, a long time making the film together before the pandemic, and now you're releasing it in a very different world. How is it feeling for you now?
Well, if you look at the film and the content of the film, it would play best at the end of a pandemic.
Oh, okay.
It would play best at the end of a pandemic. Because at the end of a pandemic, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This is new for me as well.
Why at the end of a pandemic?
Because I think, as Matt say, this is a celebration of life. And it now lands in a world where people die from a pandemic. And so there's a clash there that I'm not sure. I don't know how well that works.
And people isolating,
exactly.
Which is also a theme in the film. So,
or maybe they need the 2 hours of.
Maybe that's what we need most right now. Yeah,
it's a big question for us. Like, how does this play in a world of a pandemic? How does this play in America? How does this play in Canada? We don't know yet, and I'm curious about that. It's a strange feeling to be in Toronto without being in Toronto.
Yes.
And we would love to be there. It's a very sympathetic experience every time. And I always say you have the world's best audience in Toronto. So we are very sad not to be able to go.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Cannes. It would have been wonderful to be at the crossover of this movie. So it's a disappointment, obviously.
Well, this is the last thing I want to ask you. You have both have been to Toronto numerous times, and we desperately miss you this year. Do you have memories, particular fond memories of Toronto, things that you recall from bringing films here in the past?
Well, yeah. No matter how complicated my film have been, there's been so receptive and honest and wonderful audience every time. And so that's not a specific memory, but it's specific enough.
Yeah, I think the audience here loves your films. And Mads, I know you've done work. You brought films here. any recollections and until we can?
Oh, a ton. I mean, I remember that I thought Canada was always cold, and it turns out it's apparently the hottest time of year when you're having a festival. So I was there for the first time, visiting a friend at a hotel, exited the hotel, and a journalist recognized me. This is quite a few years ago. And there was a lot of paparazzis going, and he took some photos, and they all came running, and they all screamed my name, Vigo, over here. And I was like, and it was too late for me to correct them, so I just said, "What the hell? I'm Vigo Mortensen."
Why not?
And I loved it. I just loved the atmosphere there. And then, as you say, yes, later on I went back there, and it became my home for 3 years. And I love the city, and I love the festival. It's amazing.
You have to hear my first time in Canada.
Was that they called you Mads?
No, I was in a limo, and I was driving through the crowds of screaming people, and they screamed, and I was like, Jesus Christ, I'm already experiencing this. I'm 20-something. And then I took the window down, and everyone was screaming, "Who are you? Who are you?"
Even better. You could be
very excited. They just don't know who you are. I love it. Guys, listen, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for bringing another round. Mads Mikkelsen, Thomas Vinterberg, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.